A Trip into the Darkness, Chapter 27. Mallory felt the exact moment Andres walked into the house. She had only left the library a few times since lunch. The first two times she had gone to the kitchen to refill her water. As she hid in the library, she felt other beings come and go from within the villa. None of them had been appetizing or even interesting to her. However, she had caught a whiff of blood the last time she had gone downstairs, and it had left her with a throbbing mouth and dry throat. After that, she refilled her water in a small bathroom down the hall. There was no clock in the library, so Mallory was not certain what time it was when Andres got back. Her body clenched up in anticipation of him being closer to her again. Sitting on the leather couch, she felt his energy move in her direction before it trailed away from her. Listening, she thought she heard a door somewhere downstairs open and close. Then there was the sound of running water. Grinding her teeth, she imagined him stripping down bare, his muscular body flexing with every movement. The image of him naked within the confines of the shower, water dripping down his body and a happy trail of hair leading down his torso, made her tummy muscles clench and her heart race. In her mind's eye, she could see herself brushing her fingers through the black hair on his lower abdomen. Her fingers brushed so low, and one of her claws scraped against his skin. Mallory jumped up from the couch and started pacing. There had been a few nice aspects about being strung out with bloodlust and high off her ass because of the pills, and that was the dormancy of her libido. She had not felt lust since that night in Miami when Katie fingered her, and even then she was certain that her desire was a byproduct of feeding from Katie and Mike's energy. Even that guy she had fed from at the gas station in Laredo hadn't made her horny. She had wished she had not lost her pills. Her skin felt tight and her stomach hollow. Not only was she horny now thanks to a certain male, but she was hungry for his blood. I really am a menace to society, she thought as she continued to pace. When the shower turned off downstairs, she licked her dried lips and tried to think about the book she was almost finished with. A Tree Grows in Brooklyn by Betty Smith. The book is a semi-autobiography about Betty and her life growing up as an Irish American in Brooklyn. Mallory had always loved reading authors' autobiographies. She had hoped to write one about herself someday. The notion of writing one now seemed insane and would never sell as an autobiography, but perhaps she could market it as a dark, twisted paranormal novel. Grinding her teeth, she could only imagine what critics would say about her made-up story. When Andres approached the stairs to the library and started climbing them, Mallory froze. She did not know what emotions shot through her, but they were strong and chaotic. Appearing through the hole in the floor, he saw her and smiled. "Hey, how was your afternoon? Did you find a book you liked?" he asked. Mallory had to look away from his gaze to try and process that simple question. "It was nice, and yes, A Tree Grows in Brooklyn. It's an autobiography," she told him, then licked her dry lips, listening to his steady heartbeat. She could hear how much faster her heart was beating compared to his. "What about your afternoon?" she asked when he continued to stand there studying her. His gaze on her face made her uncomfortable and hot. She feared that he could scent her lust and hunger. She was embarrassed by her lack of self-control. "It was busy. I've been reviewing footage from the past month and have been going over orders and such." Mallory looked out the bay windows as he talked. She could feel her teeth trying to extend, and she fought against herself. Clenching her fists, her claws poked into her palms slightly, digging into her sensitive flesh. "If you're ready, I think Sophia has supper ready," he told her, after a moment of them standing there, and Mallory realized he was waiting for her response when he didn't make a move to leave. Nodding her head, she tried to smile, but felt like she missed the mark as she moved closer to the stairs to following him down. Andres didn't turn or move as she approached him. He just stood there staring at her face while she kept her eyes locked on the floor. Mallory licked her dry lips again and ignored the urge to look at him in fear that he would see her demon stirring within. "You're thirsty. Let me feed you before dinner. It'll help increase your appetite," Andres stated as if it was a normal conversation to have. Her entire body clenched with the notion. She desperately wanted to taste his blood again. It had been so good and had made her feel amazing, but she worried that he would expect an exchange this time. He hadn't asked or tried to take her blood this morning, but maybe that was only because she had been so dirty and he wanted to wait until she was more presentable. The image of Troy ravaging her neck while she lay there helpless popped into her mind. Mallory reached up a hand to touch her throat, remembering the pain and discomfort of having someone forcibly take her substance. "I'm not asking anything for you in return, Blue Eyes. You're a lot younger than me, and therefore your body requires more blood intake to function. I won't need to feed again for another few weeks, and even then I have other sources I can seek besides yours." His response was calm and cautious. He looked like he was afraid of scaring her off, as if she were a wild animal that he had rescued and brought home. Mallory guessed that notion was correct, considering she did feel like she was basically a feral beast at this point in her life. The way he had assumed what she was thinking without her saying a word was eccentric. Andre slowly climbed the last few stairs into the library. His height forced Mallory to tilt her head back so she could look at his face. She was not used to that sensation. He was wearing all black again. The sleeves of his button-up shirt were rolled up to his elbows and exposed his muscular forearms that were dusted in black hair. She had not noticed it until now, but the tops of his hands and part of his forearms had tattoos on them. One hand had a plant coming down his arm that ended upon his hand. Little flowers and berries were growing on the plant. On the other hand, there was an intricate bird that reminded her of the birds that she had seen on the island earlier. Andres took another step towards her and asked, "Will you let me feed you, Mallory?" She loved the way he said her name. He always dragged it out and rolled the R. She felt lightheaded with him standing so close. She could feel the heat and energy coming off his body and the sweet smell of his strong blood. Instead of speaking, she nodded her head. With a small smile pulling at one side of his face, he moved closer to her and stopped a mere inch away from her body before he slowly leaned down and tilted his head to the side. Going up on her tiptoes, she reached him. Mallory slipped her fingers in his longish, soft hair and then sunk her aching teeth into his sweet flesh. His blood rushed to her, and she decided it was even more delectable than she remembered. Instead of being in a rush, she slowly tugged at his neck, so she could prolong the experience of feasting on the headiest, strongest blood she had ever tasted. It was like his blood had been crafted only for her as it seeped into her system and made her body come alive. It made her feel wonderful, warm, and cool at the same time. The sexual energy that was flowing from him set her body on fire and made her feel like she was nothing more than a bundle of needy, aching nerves. Her thighs clenched together, and she felt herself become sopping wet between her legs. Her tummy muscles clenched, and she was overcome with the need to be filled and fucked hard. As she cradled his head, she wished she could pull his body to hers and make him take her. She felt herself rubbing herself against him, trying to find friction between them. That's when she realized he wasn't touching her back or even moving his body in the slightest. In fact, he seemed to be frozen, and for a second she wondered if she was only imagining his sexual energy because it wasn't building to a climax like most did when she fed from them. Breaking away from his neck, Mallory was panting as she tried to calm her raging lust. Andres's neck was still bleeding, and she felt bad for not sealing the wound for him. She was also embarrassed that she had practically been humping him while she fed, and he hadn't even made a move to touch her or reciprocate anything. He just stood there like a statue and let her use his body for what she needed. "I'm sorry," Mallory gushed, feeling ashamed that she was so turned on and he seemed unfazed. Reaching up, he wiped away the remaining blood on his neck. He had already stopped bleeding, even without her help sealing the wound. "Do not apologize, Mallory. You needed this, and you cannot help what your body feels." She had never been one for blushing, but she was certain that her face was beet red because of that statement. Had he not felt what she had? How was it possible for him to be so unfazed and calm? He wasn't even breathing hard. Maybe he was just immune to her succubus side or whatever it was about her that drove humans crazy. Nodding, Mallory turned around and looked for her glass of water so she wouldn't have to look at him. Picking it up, she said, "I'll see you in the kitchen," and then she all but ran out of the library. Downstairs, she felt a little better because she wasn't so close to him. She wanted to go back up to her room and take a hot shower so she could touch herself and relieve some of the discomfort transpiring between her legs and in her tummy. However, she could smell the delicious food aroma drifting through the house and assumed that dinner had already been ready for a while. It would be rude of her to make Sophia wait any longer. Walking into the kitchen, she saw everything was already set up on the island for them, and Sophia was washing dishes at the sink. When Mallory sat down, Andres walked into the room and took a seat beside her. She tensed and wished he would have sat somewhere away from her. She would never be able to calm her libido with him being so close. Reaching out, he picked up a freshly opened bottle of wine and poured the dark liquid into 2 glasses. He sat one down in front of her and the other in front of himself. Mallory picked up her glass and chugged the contents inside in mere seconds. It was very flavorful and heady. Sitting her glass down with barely a swallow left, Andres turned and smiled at her before picking her glass up and adding more to it. "Thanks," she told him, then grabbed a plate and started filling it, avoiding eye contact with him. Taking a tentative bite of her food, she tried her hardest to pretend he was not sitting beside her. Finishing her second glass of wine, she started to feel more relaxed instead of a needy mare in heat. When they were finished eating, Sophia wasted no time as she started clearing the island and cleaning up after them. Andres picked up the bottle of wine, topped both of their glasses off with the last of it, before leaning back in his seat to look at her. "Do you want anything for dessert, or are you ready to go?" he asked, before bringing the glass to his lips to take a sip. It was so attractive watching him drink that red liquid. The way his tongue shot out to lick the alcohol from his bottom lip after he moved the glass away from his face was something she would undoubtedly be thinking about later that night. Taking another gulp of her wine, she told him, "I'm ready to go if you are." With a nod, he stood up from the island and thanked Sophia for a wonderful meal. Then he extended his arm, indicating for Mallory to follow him, walk ahead of him towards the front of the house. She finished her glass and set it back down, then followed Andres's directions. Once they were in the living room, she stopped and told him, "I need to grab my bag before we leave." He narrowed his eyes at her in suspicion, but did not protest as she ran up the stairs and into her borrowed bedroom that she would never be seeing again. Picking it up, she realized she was tipsy and wanted to laugh. She had drank plenty of wine in her day, and none of it had made her feel like this. Slipping the dirty backpack onto her shoulders, she made her way back down the spiral stairs and tripped. Andres's hand shot out and grabbed her before she fell. The shock of his energy into her body almost made her moan. Standing up, she yanked her arm out of his grasp. He didn't acknowledge the feel of her pull and simply started walking to the door after her arm was free. Mallory followed him. At the front door, she leaned down and grabbed her dirty shoes. "You don't have to wear those if you don't want. We can find you new shoes before we go to any other stores." With a shrug, Mallory dropped the dirty shoes back on the floor and went outside. The sun was hovering over the ocean, and there were colors of pink and red in the sky as they walked to the white sports car. He beat her to the passenger door and held it open. Mallory raised a single eyebrow while fighting against a smile and told him, "You are very chivalrous, but you should know chivalry is dead." "It may be dead in your world, baby girl, but chivalry is still quite alive in mine," he replied as he closed her in. Mallory's breath caught with the baby girl. It had rolled off his tongue so easily, like he hadn't even thought about it before he said it. He slipped into the car, still smiling. He seemed playful, and she wondered if he was also feeling the effects of the wine. Speeding down the little road to the airstrip, she closed her eyes, enjoying the ride and the warm wind blowing in through the open windows. The car came to a stop, and in seconds, Andres was out of the car and at her door, opening it for her. Rolling her eyes, she held back a laugh and got out and started walking towards the plane. Andres simply walked past the aircraft to a dock behind the plane that she had not noticed this morning. There were 2 boats docked in the water. "We are sailing to the mainland?" she asked as they boarded the big fancy blue and white sports boat instead of the wooden and green sailboat. "Sailing, yes. To the mainland, no," he told her as he made his way to the control area and turned the thing on. The roar of the motor reminded her of the fancy white car. Once it was running, he opened a cooler and pulled out another bottle of wine along with 2 wine glasses. Mallory already felt buzzed from the wine at dinner, but when he handed her her glass, she took it anyway. "What do you mean, not going to the mainland? Are we not going to Colombia to go shopping?" Mallory asked, while taking a seat beside him, watching as he pulled a lever which had the boat moving forward. "We are going to another island that is populated with civilians and has a few nice stores. It is closer to here, but slightly further away from Colombia," he informed her as the boat shot across the water. Well, that's just wonderful, Mallory thought as she took a drink from her wine. Once they got to wherever it was they were going, she would either have to try and steal his boat or someone else's boat if she wanted to try and escape tonight. Finishing her glass of wine, she felt her escape plan slip away. "If we had gone to Colombia, I was going to leave tonight," Mallory informed him, watching the sun set off in the distance and the waves rush around them. With an enchanting smile on his face, Andres turned his head towards her and said, "I assumed that would be your plan, but like I told you, you aren't my prisoner. I would just prefer you stay on the island with me for a little longer." "Why?" Mallory asked, feeling confused as to why he'd want to keep her here. He said he wasn't interested in feeding from her, and he made no moves towards seducing her. He acted like he was not attracted to her in the slightest, which was fine, but confusing. So she wanted to know what the point of her staying here was. Looking back at the ocean, he replied, "You said you were going to Guatemala. What's your plan after that? What are you looking for?" Mallory looked back at her empty glass and wished she had more. Andres must have heard her thoughts because he reached over to the cooler and opened it. Pulling out the still mostly full bottle of wine, he handed it to her. She took it and filled her glass before handing it back. Taking a sip, she said, "I met a witch when I was in the States. who told me there was an answer to my problems waiting for me by the Amazon River in Brazil. She gave me directions to go there and supplied me with things to help keep me alive. Andres pursed his full lips while contemplating her answer. It is extremely dangerous in Brazil. Creatures lurking in the water and prowling around in the jungle within the Amazon. All these nasty beings can kill even the strongest of immortals. Whatever it is you seek cannot be worth the risk it would impose on your life. I do not have any other options. There are always other options, Mallory. Tell me, who is chasing you? She began to open her mouth and to tell him, but she stopped herself. She did not know anything about Andres or what he was involved in. He could easily sell her out if she told him Troy's name or what she had gotten herself into. Simply sharing her plans to travel to the Amazons was stupid on her part, yet she had desperately wanted to share her worries with someone, even if it was a stranger who held her captive, though he swore she was free. What do you do for a living, Andres? His name felt like honey rolling off her tongue. She wanted to roll the R in his name as he did with hers, but failed in her attempt. He was quiet for a minute before he told her. I guess you could say I'm a drug lord of sorts. I own a few thousand acres of land within Colombia and Venezuela where my family and I grow and harvest an assortment of legal, but mostly illegal crops, including opium, marijuana, coca, tobacco, and sugarcane. I'm also an owner and co-owner of a few small businesses on the continent and on the island we are currently headed to. Mallory stopped her gazing at the water to look at Andres. He was a what? It would make sense why he had so much damn money and the air of power surrounding him. A drug lord. She thought of Troy and how he had told her he owned stocks in the pharmaceutical world. After she had looked around his mansion, she had a feeling that he owned a little bit more than just stock. How else would he have been able to afford a gold banister in his house? Seemed fate found it funny to keep pushing her into the hands of men in the drug world. How long have you been a drug lord? Mallory asked him as they continued to sail across the ocean. My family and I are amongst the first settlers to come to South America after its discovery in Europe. Of course, there had been rumors of a new world long before Columbus stumbled upon it, but no one was actively trying to colonize it yet. We arrived in Colombia in the year of 1505 and quickly gained power and laid claims to the land that we still own today, including the island that I live on. Where is your family now? My mother and father were killed by other immortals who didn't want to lose their land to foreigners. My aunt and uncle, along with a few of my cousins who were born in the New World, still live in Colombia and help oversee our fields. My brother Adon travels around a lot and has his own island not far from mine. If you stay long enough, I'm sure you'll get to meet him soon. He likes to pop in and discuss business over a bottle of tequila and dinner. My sister Alina was a young child when we arrived in South America, and it was hard for her when our parents died. She stayed out of the business and only checks in when she feels like it. You're very open about telling me all this, Mallory said as she stared at him. I have nothing to hide, he said as he looked at her. Where was your family originally from? Spain, Andres told her before he asked. Where are you from, Mallory? What did you do before you decided to take a detrimental trip into foreign territories? Mallory snorted at his question. I was a waitress at a diner and pub. Nothing extravagant, but it paid my bills until I became a famous author. I was also attending an online mastery program to earn my degree in literature, and I lived in Ohio. In case you're unfamiliar with the states, Ohio is smack dab in the middle of the country and over 1,000 miles away from any ocean. She told him this thing and hoped that her honesty didn't come back to bite her in the ass. Troy lives in Ohio, and if Andres knew him, it would not be too difficult to put two and two together. Mallory bit her lip and wished she would have told him she was from Missouri or Kansas. The alcohol was impairing her judgment. I could see you being a literature student. You said you loved to read, so it makes sense. But I still would have guessed you to be a history major, he told her with a smile on his face, and then turned and winked playfully at her. Mallory chuckled and told him, The career field is more limited with a degree in history, or else maybe I would have been. That's nonsense. You could be a history writer or work in a museum. Andres told her and cocked his head to the side like he was trying to think of other things she could do with a degree in history. Mallory could not help but laugh. I could have also been a teacher. There you go. I knew there was something else you could probably do with a degree in history, he said with a big smile on his face. Looking out in front of them, she could see that they were approaching land. Tipping her glass back, she finished her wine.